Hello and welcome to Marketing Global Edition with me, Jasmine Montgomery.
And me, Piers Guyler.
So today we thought we'd talk a little bit about a different type of brand from our usual. So today it's not, telecom brands or bank brands or fizzy drinks brands. Today we are actually talking about CEOs as brands.
Okay, and specifically how to build the reputation of a CEO, or the CEO brand, if you like, on LinkedIn, which, face it, is the high street of where the CEOs like to set out their stalls.
Yeah, I think, too many CEOs don't think of themselves as brands, which frankly is a mistake. So our creative director, Hannah Shaw, who has taught me most of what I know about how to brand people on LinkedIn, I've got to say, she always says that people buy people. And she's on social media, and she's really right about that. I think the CEO page of a business can actually get a lot more traction, as we will go on to talk about, than the company page if done right.
Yeah, okay. And you have to approach your content very differently as a CEO on LinkedIn, don't you, Jasmine?
Yeah, and that's really what we wanted to talk about today, is kind of how to get it right.
Okay, so what are the main tips of getting it right on LinkedIn?
So to be fair, I think LinkedIn is quite a difficult platform on which to do it well. I think the important thing is to remember to be human on, a CEO LinkedIn page rather than sounding like a company. I think that's the real difference, and something that people struggle with, funnily enough. I think the humans struggle with being human. It means that, it's about authenticity and often a kind of maybe informality, a sort of realness that might seem inappropriate on the company page, but actually, retains the humanity on the CEO page.
It does feel like the role of the CEO has changed quite a lot in the last decade or so then, doesn't it? I mean, it wasn't really like that in the past. Not necessarily in terms of responsibility, but in terms of how visible they are and how much we know about them and what they think about certain issues.
There are CEOs who, as my grandfather would have said, have a face made for radio. And then there are others who are brilliant on social media, who just come across as really interesting personalities. I think, I think it's really a challenge these days.
Yeah, I'm sure not all of them want to be in a public domain. They're really good as CEOs, but they're not suited for this sort of human. Oh, look at me! I'm a day-to-day person as well. That's not necessarily what they get paid for.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a lot of it is about personality, sort of how photogenic somebody is, how comfortable they are as a writer or in front of a camera. It's really tricky. You're almost kind of a politician as much as you are a business person, especially if you're a global blue chip company CEO. So it's really tricky. And I think a lot of it is about trust, that there's a big kind of trust shift underpinning all of this. So the Edelman Trust Barometer has
Fantastic
shown
report.
that people increasingly trust individuals over institutions. And so leadership visibility can really impact brand trust, which is super interesting.
Which makes sense, doesn't it? Because people don't really trust bland company statements anymore. They trust intent, or at least perceived intent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that, they always get it right either, but I think, people have just sort of stopped believing in a lot of institutions.
LinkedIn leans into that quite heavily. Contents from individuals can generate like quite a lot of reach over company posts. Company posts people don't tend to read. Individuals, they do. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn's own insights say that content from individuals can generate 5 times the reach of company posts, which is huge because that basically means the platform is deciding who gets heard. So, LinkedIn is actually its own algorithm is really prioritizing individuals.
Yeah, so it's not really a level playing field then, Jasmine, is it?
So I think quite a few studies have found that not only do individuals get a lot more reach than company posts, but they also have higher conversion rates and they're more trusted as brand content, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, another great thing that CEOs can do they use LinkedIn is to really explain their decisions. So they've taken a critical decision. They've had to, I don't know, lay people off, or they're investing into a new country, they can actually explain that through LinkedIn, which is, it's really useful. That humanises their decision making, I suppose. They're not just a faceless organisation.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of companies fall short, really, is, they sort of default to this is happening, but they won't necessarily talk about what has led to a decision. And that can be, that can be confusing for, I guess, staff, for customers, for investors. So I think it's interesting whether it's redundancies, mergers, as you say, geographic growth, pivoting into new directions. Really interesting opportunity, great opportunity for CEOs to kind of talk about the decision making that leads up to these things.
Yeah, it's much better than just announcing and then that's the end of the discussion.
Yeah, so I think somebody like Microsoft CEO, Satya Nadella, will actually kind of walk you through their thinking on LinkedIn.
Which is way, way harder than you think sometimes, actually. And it does have a sort of sense of risk if you're not careful, because you're exposing your logic and opening yourself up to a much greater degree of scrutiny, actually, as well.
Yeah, and that gives people an opportunity to disagree with you, which is scary.
Keyboard warriors. I mean,
yeah,
a lot of flack as well. So it is a big, bold thing to do.
Although, of course, I think one of the things that CEOs, it's very hard for people who manage CEOs' communications to get their head around is actually the thing that makes things go most viral on social is kind of disagreement. And people don't want to take the risk of oh my God, somebody's going to disagree with the CEO if he puts something out there. Actually, if loads of people disagree, you're going to get a lot of virality out of it. So, it's actually great, but it's hard to get teams to kind of buy that. Another pattern I think that's really important is consistency. And I think people get really hung up on consistency of posting frequency. You're going to post every Tuesday. But I think what makes a lot of the CEOs who do well on social strong is kind of consistency of perspective. Yes,
and then you sort of you start to recognise how people think, and that's what differentiates one CEO for another, or one, I don't know, look at Simon Sinek as an example. He has a particular way of thinking, and he posts regularly with that perspective, and you get to know that perspective.
Yeah.
So you know how someone thinks.
Yeah, and I think that has a measurable effect. So a really detailed report from a LinkedIn content creation tool called Authored Up has shown that kind of consistent CEO content, that the consistency of that perspective and that sort of train of thought can lead to around 4 times more engagement when there's sort of an overarching narrative arc, and that's really powerful.
Wow, that's great. But people follow patterns, don't they? Not just posts as well. So
yeah, I think and a lot of senior leaders, are trained to sound a certain way. So I think also tone and delivery are really important. They kind of, CEOs almost have the humanity trained out of them, stand there and sound like an automatron, sound like a robot, sound like a corporate spokesperson. And actually that's not what works on social.
So yeah, I mean, tone, you can really get it wrong with tone. You have to be very, very careful. You have to be quite neutral.
In kind of other channels, but on LinkedIn that usually translates into quite forgettable.
So it's probably worth grounding this in a few real examples. Let's see what CEOs are talking about. Otherwise, it's just a bit theoretical. And actually, the examples are always really the best bit.
Yeah, I think this is where you can really start to see the difference quite quickly. So who are we going to talk about?
Okay, so Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, his post, I'll read the opening line. Jobs, skills and organisations are being reshaped by AI, ...
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting straight away, isn't it? And what is so good there is he is not starting with Microsoft. He is not saying, hey, listen, guys, here's what we're selling. He's got a point of view, right?
And that's most companies would start with at Microsoft, we.
Oh, it's just selling is just such a mistake. And it's what he's done there is he's framed it as a kind of broader trend shift first, and goes on to mention Microsoft within it, but very much something that captures people's attention, joins the debate, joins the conversation very much first, and then perhaps sells. Although again, to quote Hannah, she would say just don't sell at all. The less you can sell and the more you can join the debate, the better.
Totally agree. And that example from the Microsoft CEO is not selling. It was much more, context. Oh, let's get an interesting conversation about AI, which is, going to get traction at the moment.
I mean, I guess it only works if you actually have something to say, but I think all CEOs have something fascinating to say. They all do,
Well,
otherwise they wouldn't be where they are.
exactly. Let's talk about Richard Branson. He's got a
Yeah.
very simple, straightforward tone. He is all over LinkedIn. Uh, and so one of his recent posts starts as, "When I was 16, I built a business."
I mean, that is just brilliant, isn't it? It's, aggressively simple. I think it's, it's sort of getting to know the founder, getting to know the CEO, getting to know the human, getting to know their backstory, a glimpse into the kind of how I got here, not just their perspective, which we were talking about a minute ago, but like their backstory, their journey, if I can misquote X Factor. People love that, and it's really engaging.
Absolutely no attempt to sound clever or bamboozle. He's got such, confidence. He's so relatable, human. He's not trying to brag or set impossibly high standards for people. He admits it's okay not to know what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that about Branson. It's why it works so well. He really is such a character and allows his personality to shine through.
Mind you, you have to have done something very interesting at the age of 16 to get away with
Yeah,
what he
that's
said.
true. I'm not sure my sort of GCSE revision stories would land quite as well. Although I do have a couple of stories, but trust me, I'm never going to share them on LinkedIn at what I was doing at 16.
All right, let's talk about. Do you want to talk about Paul Polman?
Yeah, so ex Unilever, he kind of comes out with statements and says things like, trade builds much of the prosperity we enjoy. He like people are down on trade, people are down on, but actually he puts a stake in the ground and says, hey guys, your lifestyle is based on much of what we do, and it's a really strong point. And I think it's brave.
Well, that's him. That's exactly what you'd expect him to say, isn't it?
Yeah, which is the point. I think, really getting the tone of voice out there. And it's tricky because often these things are done by teams of people, not the CEO himself. And I think that's a mistake. Interestingly, a brand that we know and love very well, Nobu, the restaurant chef Nobu-san, he does all his posts himself, writes them himself, posts them himself. Marvelous. When people actually can be really authentic, that's so amazing.
It's much better than having your team try and pivot you to something trendy.
Yeah,
You tell yourself what you know, and that's what Paul Pullman does really well, I think.
yeah, and I think there are a few voices that people really kind of are excited to hear from. I mean, I think Jamie Dimon, Morgan Chase, is somebody like people sort of are hanging on his every word, which is an amazing thing to be.
Yeah, so Jamie Dimon, he's it's quite formal actually. So this is something he's just posted. "Today, I released my annual letter to shareholders."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's very much kind of in the style of Larry Fink, BlackRock, who, people are really, really excited to hear from him. And, it's LinkedIn kind of becomes the framing layer, but it's very, very exciting and people want to hear it. And that's an amazing space to be in.
Yeah, and he's not just sort of distributing his letter, he's positioning it as,
Yeah.
as very important. It's an annual letter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know.
That's really great framing. It sets it up as, much more than just an opinion. I guess Andy Jassy, interesting guy. He talks in quite a fun way. He sort of starts with, "People ask me all the time," and kind of, then goes on to answer a question that he feels, people are actually asking, which is good fun.
Quite clever though. That's like a response rather than a broadcast. That's like, he's
Yeah.
already in the conversation.
He's already in the conversation.
Doing it.
Conversation is so great. Absolutely. Now, I know you love Simon Sinek. Talk to us about Simon Sinek.
Okay, so that's obviously he's going to do something different, isn't he? So
Yeah.
but you get, he has his perspective, his way of talking. So Simon Sinek's recent post said, "Great leaders play the long game." It's all about him, his perspective.
Yeah. Very short, very clear.
And almost designed to be repeated.
Simon Sinek is really the kind of god of quotes. You feel like so many of the quotes you see in kind of the business world are sort of Simon Sinek. So he's very much kind of, I think, quote aware. He knows how to formulate that in a really good way. And then you've got stuff like, Tony Robbins talking about the recent Artemis 2 launch, who just really sort of, in a lovely way, starts his storytelling with kind of yesterday, our family sat on the couch. Not
Oh,
something you'd think of CEOs saying. I love that.
no, I like that because he's getting personal. He's
Yeah, and I
looking
think
really into his profile and the way he presents himself.
I think this is probably the hardest to get right, but rewards you the most when you do, is, CEOs who kind of are allowing themselves to be seen as very human. And it can feel really genuine or possibly staged if people kind of aren't being truly authentic.
Yeah, you have to be careful because people really do spot when something is inauthentic when it's
Yeah.
staged. I think they do.
Yeah,
Okay.
so there's no single format, I guess, but
Yeah, no, but there is a common thread, Jasmine. There is a common thread.
yes. I think the real word here is authenticity and kind of putting the human. I think, CEOs building their brand on LinkedIn, it's about that humanity, it's about the authenticity, it's about their voice being heard, getting their perspective across, and being passionate about something and letting that come through.
Yeah, it's not about being overly constructed, and it's really not about selling, right? That's
Oh,
big thing for
completely.
me. It's not selling. It's explaining what you're up to.
That is so true. It's actually really hard to get CEOs out of the selling headspace because they're all such incredible salespeople, salesmen and women. But yeah, I think it's so important that they do it, because when they do it, the results are impressive, right?
Yeah. The results can be very impressive. So you can get. I was just looking at some stats on LinkedIn. 5 times reach, 9 times engagement if you do it really well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because you can copy structure, but you can't really copy personality.
No, you can't. You can't. Anyway, I think that's probably all we've got time for today in the world of CEOs on LinkedIn.
See you soon, either here on the podcast or see you on LinkedIn.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Marketing Global Edition is sponsored by 𝐕𝐢𝐿𝐴𝐷𝐠, the ad generator for small businesses that serves you effective and affordable ads in seconds. And by 7 Brands, the international advertising and branding agency that has worked with clients around the world from Coca-Cola to Facebook.